Hey, it's Pete. I thought I'd try one outdoors, see how it goes. Apologies if there's too much street noise to a distracting degree. Let me know in the comments, and I won't do this again. What I'm doing now is not the entire book. I am. This is kind of a follow up to my week 3, and then carrying into week 4 of the Rocket Summer event. These are some short stories I read. MJ, the wonderful MJ, did a post. I'll try and link to it, or if not, I'll link to her channel, where she let everyone know, kindly let us all know that this volume, The Complete Stories of J.G. Ballard, which I used to have a print copy of, is on sale for $1.99. $1.99, over 1,000 pages for the ebook on the Kindle, and I think also the Kobo version. And as I'm taping this on Monday afternoon, GMT or GMT -1 or +1, I don't know where I am. Albania. Still, look, there's a tree in the distance. Still at that price. I just checked it, but I don't know when this will go up, so I apologize if you have to pay more for it. It's worth $12 easily if you like J.G. Ballard. It's got every story. So I read 4 of them, 2 from the 50s and 2 from the 60s. So the 2 from the 50s will finish out week 3, and the 2 from the 60s will kick off week 4 of Rocket Summer for myself, reading only British authors and doing the week-by-week decades, and Michael K. Vaughan's wonderful Rocket Summer event. And I've read this entire book before. I've read many of the short stories in the book in earlier collections, even before I had that book, so these are mostly all familiar to me. So I bought it anyway because of the price. It was just so damn cheap that I figured it would be useful to have, and I could dip in and out of the stories. I'm not planning to read it in order. I'm not even planning to go back to it necessarily for a while, except I just happened to read, since he started his short story writing career, the earliest one here is 56, so I read a couple from the early 50s and a couple from the early 60s, and I'll talk about them briefly, and then we'll get out of here. One reason I'm doing this, I'm not sure how much more reading I'm going to get done. I'm reading a book that really should not be that hard to read, but it's been a while since I've read any literary fiction, so it's taken me longer than I expected. So I thought this would be a good way to fill in and keep the habit of making grabbing videos, and of sitting outside. So the first 3 stories in the collection are Prima, Belladonna, 1956, Escapement, 1956, and The Concentration City, 1957. First one I read was Escapement, first one I read was Prima Belladonna, which is the first book in the series, which is the first story in the book. So I guess his first published story. It is set in Vermilion Sands, as is one of the later stories. And the Vermilion Sands stories are the first book I ever read by J.G. Ballard. It was published as a novel. It's really a mosaic novel in the sense that it's all short stories on one theme, one setting. But in San Francisco, in science fiction, there's also a term, and I guess it applies to other genres too, called the fix-up novel. I would call this more of a mosaic than a fix-up, because I think of a fix-up as where you take a bunch of stories that have continuing characters and continuing plot. I would think of the Foundation trilogy, which is published as 9 stories that were later published in 3 volumes, as a fix-up, because it's continuing the long story arc. Whereas a book like Martian Chronicles, the most famous science fiction one, which was inspired by Winesburg, Ohio, the most famous literary one, which is a novel by the Sherwood Anderson novel, classic American classic. I picked this time out here because it seemed like the streets were pretty quiet, but I think it's going to get noisy soon. Anyway, those are mosaic novels in the sense that they have a setting, they have a common setting, they have a common tone, they have a common mood, they have common themes, but not the same characters, and they don't necessarily build one on the other in a plot sense. So, for example, like the Voyage of the Space Beagle, which I want to read this year, is 4 novellas by A.E. Van Vogt. The first one would be Black Destroyer, which is what Alien was inspired by, ripped off from, and then they ended up having to pay for it. And then the next 3 stories are other adventures of the same crew of the Space Beagle. So that's what I would call a fix-up. We've got a continuing, I don't know, I'm overdoing this, but anyway, but Vermilion Sands, and at the time I read it, it was in high school. It was really the only J.G. Ballard book that was available to me. It would seem strange now. Many of there was the only one commonly in print in the United States, and it was always on a list. If there was a list of writers you should read or books you should read, it was the representative J.G. Ballard book. I don't know why it's not what I think of these days in J.G. Ballard, because you think of Crash, you think of the Crash trilogy. That's not what it's called, but High Rise Crash and Concrete Island. Those are kind of like the central J.G. Ballard books, I think. And of course, his later books, Empire of the Sun, is probably his most crossover book, his breakout book, even though it was very late in his career. And many great novels. Vermilion Sands is set in a artist slash rich people resort town, kind of like Palm Springs, very much like Palm Springs. It's definitely, it could be on another planet. It could be in the far future. It could be in an alternate or near future. It's definitely the city of Vermilion Sands is definitely west of somewhere, because there's characters in one of the stories I read that talk about heading back east because it's not working out. At the time of the stories, it's a rundown former playground of the rich, where the celebrities used to go and build these fancy bizarre houses and things, or sort of trendy hipster artists would go to make these elaborate constructions and things like that. So since I haven't read reread the entire book in a long time, I don't remember what the timeline was, whether it was an artist colony that got taken over by that got, like sort of like a Burning Man thing, where like first it's all hippies, and then it's hipsters, and then the celebrities take over, and then it sort of dies out. But the stories are in the dying out period. The first one, like I said, is Prima Belladonna. Sort of I'm going to pass over that one a little bit. I didn't care for it that much. It's a sort of a music themed one. Then the next story in the collection, the second story in the collection, is called Escapement. Just something about television. I'll be very honest, it did not register with me. I would have to read that one again, so I probably shouldn't even mention it, because it didn't have a big effect on me. The third story from the 50s that I read was the first one that really struck a chord. It's called The Concentration City by 1957, and I half recollected this story. I remembered the second half of this story, and very clearly, and I thought that was the story. It's a lot more involved and complicated than that. There's really enough in this story for a 10-volume trilogy someone would put out today, of just this whole world that he that he that Ballard creates here. I wanted to read the. I'm going to pause this for a second. Okay, I've got it. I don't know why it was so important to me to read this opening here, but maybe even looking at it is better. But anyway, it's The Concentration City, written in 1956. Noon talk on Millionth Street. Sorry, these are the West Millions. You want 9,775,335th East. $5 a cubic foot. Sell. Take a westbound express to 495th Avenue, cross over to a red line elevator, and go up the 1,000 levels to the Plaza Terminal. Carrying on south from there, and you'll find it between 568th Avenue and 422nd Street. That is brilliant. That is science fiction writing at its finest, and I'm not kidding. You're put so deep into a different world. I mean, I don't know if you've been on a trip to New York or something like that. That's definitely a New York grid that's described. You're right in the world. You know that this is a vast, vast, vast place. You're also thrown right in the middle of dialogue, so you get a sense of the, the craziness, just the being on the street and people shouting things at you, and directions being asked for, and other people trying to sell you stuff, and the character then goes on to he's described as M, just M period originally. Then somebody else describes him by his full name later on, though. But he's trying to get to a therapist because he's had a dream in which he's floating in space and with nothing around him, which is a strange concept to this. Oh, Matheson is his name. A strange concept in this world that we're in. Just the very concept of just being in open space with nothing around you, not touching anything. So you get this sense of just an insanely built up, there's no real sky. In his dream, he conceives of the concept of flying, which he's assured by everyone is, once he can explain the concept to people, that it would just be impossible. So this is a future where there's no flight. There are no planes or trains and cars, and that there's no flight because there's no place to fly. There's no sky, in a sense. Don't know how to describe that. It's not done in super detail because it's a detail of the world that the characters don't have, of what the sky would look like, because everything's just built up everywhere. There's no space, and he and a friend of his they come up with a prototype design of like a drone or a little flying. But they find a stadium, a sports stadium that they can fly it in. But he really wants to look for someplace bigger, like some kind of open field. They spend a lot of time researching the city and trying to find someplace. Now that part was all. When I was reading that, I thought I was reading a story I didn't remember particularly well. The second half of the story, which is what I thought was its own story, when he gets on a train and goes looking for this open space or some open space, and it's just brilliant. I won't go talk any more about that. I hope I didn't talk about it too much. You should really read that story, The Concentration City, the third story in the volume, probably in the free download part, because it's such a giant book. I think it's 1,200 pages in the print edition. Can I look that up? So probably still in the free sample, but you should just buy it. $1.99. My God, still can't believe it. I almost want to buy another copy for myself, and I'll have 2 copies for $4.99. But anyway, it's really a treasure trove of J.G. Ballard's work, and I wouldn't say that all of his best stuff is in short stories, but a lot of it is. And the interesting thing about reading this collection in this format is it's all chronological. So he had, other than Vermilion Sands, he also had another workup novel later on called The Atrocity Exhibition, experimental stories. But reading them in this format, in the complete stories, they're all just done in chronological order from the oldest to the newest, not the way they're presented in his canon as separate short stories on different themes. So it is a different way to read the short stories. Okay, so that takes care of the 1950s. I'm going to pull an audible here and cut this short, and I'll do another short video about the 2 stories I read for the week 3 1960s, and I'll put that up at some time too. Anyway, 3 J.G. Ballard stories, a link in the comments to where you can get the entire collection of, I don't know how many stories, 75 stories in one volume for $2 electronically. Okay, thank you guys.